Making Arkansas schools safer, what to propose and what can pass. Guns, how big a role in the politics of 18, the big race especially. Guns, Arkansas's premier retailer, raises the sales bar. And the awkward embrace, the state and a substance that's officially illegal. We'll cover it all next on Arkansas Week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. Guns and grass, two of the dominant issues before Arkansas state lawmakers this past week. We'll get to our roundtable in just a moment. First, two of the lawmakers who are playing instrumental roles in both of those issues. Senator Missy Irvin, Republican of Mountain View, and Representative Doug House of North Little Rock, or North Pulaski County, I should say. So, Mr. House, so let me stand corrected on that. Senator Irvin, let's begin with you. You are co-chair of Joint Performance Review, JPR, and you have announced that you want to hold really a lengthy series of hearings on school safety.
Correct.
This is just as the administration, Governor Hutchinson, on Thursday announces, well, I'm going to have a task force.
Correct.
And funded it to the tune, I think, of $300,000. Yes. Are you going to be bumping into each other?
No, I think it's exactly what we need to happen right now. So the governor did sign an executive order to create the Commission on Arkansas School Safety. We will be working alongside that commission, the legislative branch, because ultimately we're the ones that are going to have to put those policies into place through a legislative package, which we hope to have ready for the 2019 session. So that's the purpose of the Joint Performance Review Committee. We have the opportunity to really look in depth at all of these issues that surround school safety and school security for our students. And I think it's really about having a holistic conversation about mental health, about hotlines that are See Something, Say Something hotlines, exploring all the different policies that are happening in all the different states right now, looking at what our best practices outside of the state of Arkansas as well as inside the state of Arkansas, inviting school boards, school administrators, school resource officers to hear about their programs that they have implemented that are effective, sheriffs, law enforcement, and really have a strong and healthy dialogue and debate about all aspects dealing with school safety.
Well, one aspect would appear to be gun legislation, and if I understand correctly, you, as has Mr. Hutchinson, have put that off limits, correct?
Well, I think the conversation really needs to be about school safety. I want to explore.
Now, how do you have that, though, Senator, without talking about it?
No, I think you will. I think we will in Joint Performance Review. I think we will have those conversations. I think we will look at those different programs that some school districts in Arkansas have already taken and put in place. The Guardian program is one in Texas that has been put in place. So we're not going to dismiss that conversation. We're going to have that conversation, and we're going to have a healthy debate and a lively debate, I'm sure, because there are folks on all different sides of that issue. But you have to talk about it, and that's what we're going to do, and explore the policies, implications of everything, the consequences of legislation and the unintended consequences. If we can hash that out between now and the 2019 session, I think we'll just be that much further down the road. But I think it's going to entail all those different conversations. We have a lot of rural schools that are located in very remote parts of the state, particularly in my district. And so your response time from your local sheriff's offices sometimes can be at least 20 minutes or if not greater. So we do need to have a serious conversation about being able to have personnel that are trained on those campuses to keep our kids safe.
Where's the money?
That's a good question. I think there's going to be money there, and I think we need to put a push there for active shooter training, for more school resource officers. The active shooter training, I think, needs to be mandatory for both faculty and students to attend that, so that the students know what to do, where to go, and how to effectively save their lives and the lives of their classmates. They need that training. I think students need to be engaged. They need to be be listened to. I think they need to also be assured by their local school boards and their local administrators about the steps that they are taking to ensure the safety of their students and their faculty. There needs to be a comprehensive response time and plan in place with your county sheriffs, with your local law enforcement. That needs to be fully communicated to everybody involved, and it needs to be executed, and it needs to be practiced and planned. And so we're going to be looking for a lot of different aspects to this school safety program. So it's a big conversation. We also need to address broken kids. You know, there are a lot of kids out there that come from broken families and pretty bad situations. We need to talk about that. We don't need to just stick our head in the sand. We need to realize and understand that there's a lot of area in juvenile justice reform that we need to pursue as well, in order to make sure that there are services for those kids that are in need. They're in need of different services, whether it comes to mental health issues. So we're going to have a full conversation.
We have talked, you have brought up your several mental health counseling, school
Yes.
safety, and all of which is expensive. Yeah. And the budget's as tight as a tick.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't get additional parole officers funded, or at least the House has not gone along with a proposal thus far. Mm-hmm. And only Thursday anyway, ADC announces that it's at least temporarily closing 2 prisons because it's understaffed.
Well, I think you have to have a conversation about your current resources and how you're using them and if they're effective or not. In 2013, I ran a bill called the Close to Home Act, really to try to attack juvenile justice reform. And that bill, if I had passed it, would have put more money into community services for those juveniles, apart from residential care. And so I think that's where we need to really focus our attention, and I will be pursuing those policies in 2019 as well. But it's incredibly expensive to basically imprison a youth. It's really expensive, but I would rather use that money and let our juvenile judges work, like Troy Braswell here in Conway. And in his district, he has a teen court. It's been very, very effective. We need to make sure that we work collectively with the judicial branch of government and with those judges and make sure that the resources that we are spending are effective. And if they're not, let's change that. So I've been working on this since 2013. That reform would bring more money and more funding away from residential, but to community-based solutions and community help for those youth.
One more quick one before I go to Mr.
Sure.
House over. I've got to go to your colleague over here.
Yeah.
It's tight as a tick in the Senate on Arkansas Works.
Yes.
Will you get it by the end of next week?
Hope so. I know that we are waiting anxiously to hear from CMS on the waiver. I think we will hear that on the waiver. You know, I am reminded that DHS is not just the Arkansas Works program, but it also is a program that funds foster care children, which right now we have over 5,000 children in foster care. That money is absolutely needed for those foster families and for those kids. I'm also reminded that Division of Youth Services and the juvenile detention centers that we as a state decided that we would take over when the legislative branch did not approve those private contracts to run those. So that funding is directly related to that as well. So there's a lot of other aspects to that appropriation that I hope folks will see that are very strong needs in the state, not including, you know, obviously including those on disability as well.
Gentleman from North Pulaski County, the state achieved something of a milestone. We got the 5 licensed cultivators, or however we're going to style them, of marijuana, legislation that you've been supervising since the initiative was passed. What's next? Are we on target here?
We are.
Institutionally speaking, I don't mean...
Institutionally. You know, sometimes I jokingly use an old analogy. You can have 2 out of 3, fast, right, and cheap. Well, we've selected, according to the amendment that was passed, right and cheap. And it hasn't been as fast as we would like to. But talking to people from other states, proud to say on behalf of the Marijuana Commission, who's really done the bulk of the work, is that ours is being looked at as a model program. Very pleased with the Marijuana Commission and the work they've done. They've taken some tremendous personal sacrifices to do these things. We are on track. We are on target. Licenses will be awarded here in the next day or two, placed on paper. Construction will start, and then the next step, the Marijuana Commission, Medical Marijuana Commission, is going to be issuing the dispensary licenses. I'm very pleased with the process. I have received exactly 3 complaints, and I've referred them to their attorneys, and they can do what they think they need to do.
All right, you've heard our colloquy here on school safety, and have been a part of it anyway, as part of the General Assembly. Your thoughts?
Her first word.
Can I point out here, the world's largest corporation based in Arkansas has suddenly decided, along with several other institutions, to retail firearms dealers, raise the age to 21. The governor, which the President of the United States now, at least today, says he supports or advocates. Does that change the color of this conversation at all?
Not really, because for years and years it's been 18 for long guns, and 21 for pistols. Because you can conceal a pistol, you can't really conceal a long gun very well. If that's what that business chooses to do, I have no criticism. That's their business. They run it the way they want to. I don't know necessarily that we're ready to tell youngsters that they can't purchase a gun after they turn 18 if they're old enough to serve in the military. Then it becomes kind of a strain to tell a person who can vote, who can serve in the military, they can't buy a gun by law. But if that's what the personal businesses want, the individual businesses want to do, that's fine. As far as school safety, I think holistic's the right word. There are dozens and dozens of ideas out there. There are pros and cons to each one of those ideas. There are strengths and weaknesses. Our task is to maximize the strengths and the pros and minimize the cons and the weaknesses. Different school boards and different schools have different requirements and different setups, so a lot of this is going to be involving the local people.
Come January, or by some extraordinary vote in a special session, do you see any appetite at all for any kind of state restrictions on sale of firearms?
I don't think that'll happen in this General Assembly, no, sir. And looking at the board on Thursday when the candidates have all filed, I don't see that happening in the next 2 years either.
Simply out of town. Mr. House, Ms. Irvin, Senator Irvin, thanks very much for coming and being part of the program.
Thank you.
Please come back. And we'll be back in just a moment. Back now with a gang of 3. Heather Yates from the Political Science faculty at UCEA, Michael Hiblin, news director at KUAR Public Radio Central Arkansas, Wesley Brown, reporter and editor at Talk Business and Politics. Thanks to everybody for coming in. Wesley, let's go to you first, or whoever. We've had a lot of action, a lot of dialogue anyway, on guns this past week at the state capitol. We have the task force announced, Michael, by Mr. Governor Hutchinson, and also Senator Irvin, just on the program, is going to hold hearings. There may be 1 or 2 other committees that get in on this as well.
Yeah, the governor announced on Thursday he's calling it the Arkansas School Safety Commission. 11 people come from law enforcement as well as education to really study how to better protect schools. A lot of it has to do with the buildings themselves, limiting access, and also finding ways so that warning signals aren't missed, like you had down in South Florida with the shooting there. But the governor allocated $300,000 to study this issue. It came from just discretionary funds that he has available, and we expect to get the first report on July 1st, and they'll continue working through November.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think even though both Representative House and Senator Irvin talked about the issues that are going to be, I think eventually the conversation has to go to just as it is happening all across the United States. The guns have to come. That conversation has to come up, and as both of them noted, I still don't think there's an appetite in the General Assembly to do any real issues as far as raising the age limit or restricting the type of weapon. So that conversation, it will begin off with mental illness, beginning off with other things, but I think the volatility will lead it towards some conversations on guns.
Heather, that would seem to be the history of it. There's a lot of talk.
And the state has to give the appearance it's doing something in response. It has to give off the appearance that commissions are being formed and that this issue is being taken seriously at the state legislative level. What is happening with this national discourse and this national dialogue, all the way from the White House down to Little Rock, is that it's creating this sense of cross pressures, that legislators are going to feel cross pressures and really in a vice. Pressure to appear, in this case, to be doing something, but also pressure to actually make substantive changes. And it's going to come back around, as I said at this table before, it's going to come back around to the actual mechanism, the gun, the weapon. Sure, school design, mechanisms in place, protocols in place, training, what have you, but at the heart of this,
Intervention, mental health, everything.
all of that is what was said previously on the panel, that there's this holistic approach, but the holistic approach cannot also ignore firearms in this state. And so right now, for all intents and purposes in this political climate, the state is moving forward with these commissions and this dialogue because the optics are the state has to appear to be responsive.
What's interesting is how the dialogue is affecting these corporations and their just their outlooks on their profits and their corporate image. Walmart has come out and said that they're going to raise the limit to 21. Dick's and several other of the big retail chains and sporting goods chains have said they're going to raise raise it to 21, and that may put some pressure. You see these corporations are doing this. You may see them put some political pressure on them when they see, because some of these same corporations, they lobby Congress, they lobby state legislatures, and they may put some pressure on these lawmakers to make some changes, because this cavalcade, this rush of pressure from these kids down in Florida and kids all over America and from communities is real. It's one of those things. I don't know if Heather is studying this, but this is the fastest I've seen this kind of, especially on gun legislation, really move and touch people, even people who have for years said, we're not going to do any gun legislation. We're not going to even talk about it. Now you're having senators in Congress and senators at the state legislature who are willing at least to have that conversation.
Well, you used the term pressure, and it seemed to me the pressure would have to come from below. What I was thinking in terms of Walmart and President Trump was not pressure, but cover.
Right.
And Mr. House indicated just moments ago, not enough.
Right. Well, and what's different in the wake of Parkland with the young people mobilizing is that this is, and the reason why it's different, this has been in the national discourse as well, but these are students who are speaking out. These are the victims who now have a voice who are speaking out. Not only are they students with voices, but they are also potential voters, future voters. Many of these students are seniors. They're turning 18 this year, and they see their efficacy. They see places where they can make a difference. And something else that is really unique in this context as well is that we have private enterprises, multinational corporations voluntarily taking action to change their internal policies on their protocols on how they are going to sell and to whom they're going to sell their firearms to, which is also another cross pressure. And this is also some competition or some pressure within the world of advocacy and special interest groups, where you have multinational corporations might actually indirectly start applying pressure to organizations like the NRA. Now, I don't see that Walmart and Dick's and these multinational corporations changing the NRA stance, but there's certainly some pushback, and pushback can matter. I don't know if it's going to matter in 2018, but if we're looking at the long term, it could matter in 2 years. It depends.
Michael?
And you also have the talk about arming more teachers. That's been a heated discussion. The governor noted Thursday that there are only 316 armed school resource officers in the state. That comes down to enough for only a third of the state schools, and that 13 school districts do allow certain staff members who have had training dealing with active shooters carry firearms. Whether or not we expand that is a question that many are considering.
Not just playing devil's advocate, but and whatever the continuing debate over the Second Amendment and corporate pressures, whatever, how to go about implementing is not the horse already out of the barn. It's estimated with 350, 360 million firearms in the United States in private hands already.
Yeah.
How do you go about
it? It's going to be really difficult because I was reading.
Where do you start? How do you do it?
Yeah, in the Tulsa world, while all this is going on, there's gun shows and people are still, like you said, there's people that have multiple weapons and so you're right. The horse is out of the barn, and it's going to be very difficult to go back in time and say retroactive. We're going to take people's guns, or what are we going to do? So it's going to be.
Well, I wasn't even suggesting Wesley confiscation of
right.
all firearms, but how do you regulate
well, I
the
think
AR-15 knockoff?
Well, I think you start with the conversation. You start with the conversation, and then. I think the legislators are going to have a really tough job. They're going to have to make some tough decisions too to say what can we do, how far can we go, but actually starting those conversations and as we talked about, those pressures are real right now. I see it in my community. I see it at our churches. That those conversations are real.
Well, there's another sort of pressure, and that's fiscal pressure. You got a state budget that there's just not much maneuvering room in there. The administration says has already proposed another round of tax cuts, about $180, $200 million worth, come January. And everything that's been mentioned so far costs money.
Yeah, they do. And well, like you said, those pressures, those fiscal pressures and that may be their out. We want to do something, but we can't because we don't have the money. That may be the out for the legislature.
And that's where this conversation about arming teachers in the classroom comes into play, because if the legislature can frame the narrative as teachers voluntarily arm themselves, that supplies them this conversation that teachers will voluntarily use their own resources to arm themselves, and then maybe they get a tax cut later down the line to incentivize it. That's kind of how I see that playing into this fiscal conversation. And the state legislature has kind of put itself in a very uncomfortable position, because last spring when the state legislature in the state of Arkansas passed the conceal and carry or open carry on campuses. So we've got this dueling narrative of school safety through the pre-kindergarten through 12, and then once those students get to the university level, then it's open carry. How do we regulate this at the university level? Right. And I know that there's conversations at the university level that university professors are not feeling comfortable about voluntarily arming themselves in the classroom. That kind of seems counterproductive to what education is about. So Arkansas has put its legislature, or the Arkansas legislature has put itself kind of in this very uncomfortable dueling narrative where pulling together these commissions and moving forward at least gives the appearance that it's being responsive to this conversation, starting that conversation, but what the solution looks like yet, to be determined.
Well, would anyone argue that the momentum, anyway, is with the pro-gun advocates? Whether it's arming teachers, concealed carry, despite whatever may have happened in Florida or other venues, they've still got the wind at their back.
Yeah, I mean, and the NRA has done a great job at the federal level, especially in Congress, but also here in Arkansas. Heather talked about the concealed carry. You should have seen the pressure from the NRA on that legislation. It impacted the very writing of the bill and several amendments that came into the bill. So that you're right, the pro-gun, even though there's this pressure and these momentum from society and from the younger voters, the NRA is still very strong, very still has a lot of influence, especially in Congress.
Yeah, Michael?
Well, the big issue, though, is then for police responding to an active shooter. If teachers are armed, it's hard to tell the good guy from the bad guy, and you increase the likelihood that innocent people can also be killed beyond those victims of an active shooter. And
coloring the situation is the Republican gubernatorial primary. There is one, and you have a decidedly pro-gun, fair to say, woman who's opposing Governor Hutchinson.
Yeah, and she filed this week in the legislature, and
Ms. Morgan,
Jan Morgan, and very strongly, and she's got it's going to be interesting in this race how that conversation that conversation will be had, because she's going to bring it up, not just once, not just twice, but several times. This issue of the Second Amendment, and she's has a lot of supporters in her corner who will keep that conversation going and will affect these task forces and these conversations. As you said, Arkansas is an outlier in terms of this. We are one of those states where there may be conversations in other states about doing some things that are really strong, like in Florida, because that's where it happened. But in Arkansas, it's going to be very difficult to really move any gun legislation.
Haven't heard anyone who's close to the situation who will not say privately, Mr. Hudson's taking this very seriously. How seriously should he take it?
I don't. Well, he's not going. Well, he's going to outspend Jen Morgan no matter what, because the cash on hand that they have. So she can try to launch a serious bid, and I'm sure she's going to try. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how big your war chest is, and Hutchison has a very healthy war chest. And so in the primary, if it comes down to it, he'll just outspend her, and so it won't be much of a problem for the Hutchison campaign.
But he remains very popular too.
Yeah, but one thing Jan Morgan has shown a propensity to do, she has the ability to make headlines. So it will be interesting.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they'll be in the headlines. That's for sure. Yeah.
Got to end it there because we're out of time. Thanks to you guys for coming in, and as always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.